Hi, welcome back everybody. Today we're going to talk about mammals, and the day I'm recording this is Monday, and I think it is around 5:19. Who knows anymore? If you're wondering, I did get a haircut. My wife, who is a wonderful person in every way, is a well-educated lawyer, and anyway, she cut my hair and my kids' hair. We have low expectations, which is a key to surviving the pandemic. I think low expectations. So yes, my hair is cut and it's unusually short, but you know what you get? You get what you get and you don't throw a fit. That's from Miss Fitzharris, one of the best preschool teachers that the world has ever known. Miss Fitzharris. And she taught my kids that. We still use it, even though my kids are 13 and 10 now. That preschool teacher, Miss Fitzharris. You get what you get. You don't throw a fit. So there you go. Low expectations. So today we're going to talk about mammals. And this will be our last of the taxonomic groups we have to cover, which will be good. And we're moving towards the end of the semester. However, we still have some comparative anatomy and physiology to do. But once we get through the mammal group, I always feel a little bit better because we're kind of done with the lecture material that you need for lab. So in the beginning of the semester, we always start off behind lab. So lecture is kind of dragging, and I'm always trying to catch up to get ahead of lab, and I'm always behind. And right about now, this lecture is when I finally push over the edge, and lecture is now just a little bit ahead of lab by about a week or two as we go into the end of the semester. So today we're talking about mammals, and mammals, of course, includes all kinds of things you're used to, including humans. Mammals have hair. That's a mammalian hair is a characteristic that all mammals have, even things like dolphins, which are fairly, you think of them as being very like hairless, very smooth. They do have little tiny hairs on them. So all mammals have hair. They are endothermic. They have mammary glands, which are used to produce milk, and the milk is used to feed the growing babies. They all give live birth and are viviparous and feed the baby via a placenta, with two exceptions, which are some unusual ones that we'll talk about. And when you want to talk about unusual mammals, you go to Australia, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But essentially, Australia's been separated right about at the time of the mammalian evolution. So you find the most different mammals in Australia. They start undergoing teeth differentiation. So in reptiles, the teeth are all, birds, of course, lose their teeth and have no teeth, but the reptile teeth are kind of all the same, whether they're in the front of the mouth or the back of the mouth, they're all about the same. Mammals start to undergo teeth differentiation, where you have things like very flat molars to grind up food, and canine teeth for puncturing and killing animals if you're a predator. So mammalian teeth vary greatly depending on where they are in the mouth and what kind of animal you have. So we start seeing that. And the jaw in mammals is modified to incorporate the bones into an inner ear. We'll talk about that. And first we'll talk about the jaw of mammals. And so if you look at the evolution of mammals from a synapsid type of relative, one of the things that you'll notice is that in a reptilian jaw, you'll see all these different bones in here. But in a mammalian jaw, many of those sort of disappear. They don't disappear, they become other parts, such as the inner ear we'll talk about, like you can see down here in the reptile ear. there's just this one middle ear bone, the stapes. But in the mammalian jaw, there's these 3 bones that are articulated together. And that might result in better frequency sound, or it just might be a byproduct of the evolution of it. But either way, there's clear change that we see. And the jaw, the joint of this, you'll see in a reptilian jaw, you have this articulation point here in the back. It's also pretty far in the back in the mammalian jaw, but you'll see all this surface area here, and you'll see once again this arch we talked about before on your cheekbone. Underneath that, you can feel that muscle. There are all these sites for muscle attachment. So if you want to learn more about the evolution of mammals, that is constantly being worked on, and probably the best source of that is the Berkeley's Evolution Lab, which for many, many years has been updating and posting interesting research as they dig in deeper into the evolution of the changes in really all forms of life. This particular one is for vertebrate evolution, this link, but their evolution lab is top notch. Okay, so once again, you can see that then in the reptilian, present day reptilian middle ear, there's just this one bone, the stapes, and some of those same bones, like the incus and the malleus, those bones are part of the jaw joint that you see in a reptile. So this is our reptile, this is a synapsid, but it shows you these different bones that end up becoming the middle ear. So a synapsid is sort of the group that we think led to the evolution of mammals. So synapsids are extinct, and they are not reptiles, and they're not mammals. They're sort of their own group, but we think that was the synapsid skulls, and those animals are what gave rise to present day mammals. But you can see that those are the jaw, those are part of the jaw bones and that synapsid skull, and those become part of the middle ear in present day mammals. Okay, so once again, we'll go through our groups as we've done before, and there'll be some groups in lab once again, and I'll go over this when we do the lab part. But for lab, it'll be like the birds and the insects, where we'll give you the orders. If we want to ask an order question, we'll give you the sheet, has all the orders on it, and you just have to pick from there. But in lecture, there are certain groups I want you to know. For example, we'll start with the monotremata, and the monotremata are both the platypus and the spiny echidna, both found in Australia. And these are an unusual order of mammals because they lay eggs. So they have mammary glands, but they have no nipples to deliver the milk. So instead, the milk comes off the fur of the mother, and the young echidnas or platypuses suck the milk off the fur. Okay, so once again, found in Australia, egg-laying mammals. There are 2, the platypus and the spiny echidna. And here's the spiny echidna, and here's the little tiny egg. So you can see that's the egg. It lays the egg, and there's the little baby coming out. It doesn't look like it's done yet. And that's the other thing about Australian mammals, is they're born or hatched, depending on the group, and they got a long way to go during development. So that's what you get in the very beginning, something like that, like almost like a tadpole, and it needs a great deal of work to get it to keep going. Then we have the marsupialia. The marsupialia are the kangaroos, possums, and koalas. They have an embryo that completes development in a pouch. Locally around us, we have opossums. Throughout the world, there are a few more marsupials, but in general, again, nearly all the marsupialia are found in Australia. So the entire country essentially of Australia continent has all, for the most part, except for introduced animals, much of that are things like kangaroos and koalas. They're in the marsupialia, and they have a pouch. We have the local opossum here, which is not related to rats, although everyone will say it looks just like a rat. It's not at all like a rat, because it has a pouch and the babies develop inside the pouch. Okay, so there we go. There's a young, this one is a brush-tailed possum, which we have in our meat collection, I believe. And so this one's inside the pouch, and it's feeding, and it's already, so it's been born, and this thing has to grow. And again, the Australian mammals look like they're not done often. This is like it should still be inside a placenta somewhere, but being a marsupial, they are born and they have a very long period to develop, and that's what you're seeing there. This thing, which also looks like a rat, I actually had a chance to have one of these come running at me when I was in Australia many years back, and we were at this ecological reserve, and I heard something running, turned the light on, this thing's running towards me. They're not very big. They're about the size of a big rat. And it is called a long-nosed bandicoot. And it has the shortest gestation period of any mammal. I think it is a 13-day gestation period. I'll have to look that up. I think it's 13 days. So it gets pregnant. It's pregnant for 13 days. And it's born, and then what comes out is something like this, something little tiny, and then it needs to develop inside a pouch like the other things. All right, then we have the proboscidae. The proboscidae are elephants. They have a long muscular trunk, thick, loose skin, and upper incisors elongated as tusks, as you can see there. We have the order Sirenia, and the Sirenia are the manatees and the dugongs. These are aquatic animals with fin-like forelimbs and no hind limb. The hind limbs are sort of fused into like a big paddle, so they're not separate. They're one big paddle-like structure, and they move around through water, in shallow water usually, and they are herbivorous. They eat plants. Okay, these two you don't need to know, because again, I'm only circling the groups I want you to know as we go. So this one you don't need to know as well. The next groups are the Lagomorpha, the Rodentia, and the Primates. So the Lagomorpha are rabbits, hares, and pikas. You probably never heard of a pika before. A pika it's a pika. First time I heard of a pika, I said, "What's a pika?" It's a pika, and that's it looks sort of like a gopher, but it's not a gopher, because a gopher is a rodent. So they're more closely related to rabbits and jackrabbits and hares, and I'll mention that in a second. And then we have the Rodentia, which are gophers, squirrels, beavers, rats, porcupines. This is a really big group. This is the biggest group of mammals. And the difference between the two, they can look quite similar, but the big difference that you can easily spot in the skull is the presence of these peg teeth. So in a Lagomorpha, there are two sets of incisors on the top and the bottom jaw. And in the rodents, there's only one set of those. So if there are two sets of teeth like that, although the skulls can look kind of similar in other ways, if it's two sets of teeth, two sets of incisors, then those are lagomorphs. If it has one set, then those are Rodentia. And then we have the group that we belong to, which we'll go into more detail in a minute. Those are the primates, which are lemurs, monkeys, chimpanzees, gorillas, and humans. And we'll talk about the evolution of that group a little bit more in detail. Then we have the carnivora. The carnivora are dogs, wolves, bears, cats. They have short, pointed canine teeth and molars for shearing, and they're carnivorous. Foxes are carnivores, cats, bears. This is where you can really see the differentiation in teeth. So if you look at like a Lagomorpha and a Carnivora, those two orders show, for example, very different kinds of teeth because they're highly differentiated depending on what the animal eats. Then we have the artiodactyls and the Perissodactyla. You can skip this word here. I always just go right to the artiodactyl and the Perissodactyla. These are animals with hooves, and this is again a really two really big groups that are distinguished by the fact that things like sheep, pigs, cattle, deer, and giraffe have hooves with an even number of toes. So they have 2 or 4 toes on each foot. The Perissodactyla, which are horses, zebras, tapirs, and rhinos, have an odd number of toes on each foot. So it's usually 1 or 3, and I guess it could be 5 in some cases, but odd number. Okay. All right. So there's my 3 orders on that particular group. Now we'll talk about a little bit about primate evolution, and I want to walk you through some of the primate evolutionary evidence and how we use it. Primates mainly began their big evolutionary period 65 million years ago at the end of the Cretaceous and extinction. And what's significant about primates, first of all, is they have, as a group, is they have binocular vision. They have 2 eyes that point forward, and that's really important and significant for depth perception. When you're going to move through a complex set of structures like tree branches, you need to be able to judge distance from one tree branch to another, and having your eyes both in front of you allows for better depth perception because you have 2 independent eyes that are able to take in light, and you kind of need that to have good depth perception. They also have an opposable thumb, and so their thumb is opposite of their other fingers, and that allows them to grab things, which sets up the ability to not only grab branches and things of that sort, but also later on for mammals in this group to be able to use tools and carry things and stuff of that sort. So the first group here within the primates are the prosimians. And the prosimians are primates that are not monkeys, and they're not apes. These include some of the very early ancestors of the primates, like lemurs and tarsiers. Here's a lemur here, and this is a famous lemur that you see at most zoos with a long black and white striped tail. Okay, then we have the monkeys. The monkeys are what we call arthropods. Those appear in the fossil record around 50 million years ago, or their evolution of them began about 50 million years ago. We can separate monkeys into 2 sort of artificial groups that we call New World and Old World monkeys. And the New World monkeys are in North and South America, and Old World monkeys are in places like Africa. And really they are distinct groups. Monkeys themselves are not really a perfectly defined group because they're not all related to one another, but often we separate them that way. And again, the evolution of those appears to take off around 50 million years ago. Then we have the hominoids, and the hominoids are apes. And that's around 30 million years ago. These are our closest ancestors. And so if you look here around 30 million years ago, right about there, our monkey groups and all those begin to sort of separate from the ape groups, gibbons, orangutans, gorillas, and our closest relatives, the chimps and the bonobos, and then humans there. So one thing that people get wrong is that misunderstand evolution is they want to argue with you about the fact that humans did not come from monkeys. Now, first of all, that's what I've heard many times. So here's monkeys way over here. No, that's way back. Okay, so they've got that part wrong right in the beginning. So they don't even mean monkeys, they mean chimps. Okay, chimps are bonobos. And they're right in the sense that chimps did not come from, or humans did not come from chimps, nor did chimps come from humans. The point is that somewhere back maybe 5 to 7 million years ago, the ancestors that would eventually give rise to chimps and bonobos shared some common ancestor, and then those split. Chimps and gorillas and orangutans, these are all new species. It's not like the chimp was around 30 million years ago and they got stuck as a chimp and humans made it and humans are better than everything else. You might agree with humans being better than everything else, but the chimps that you see in the wild or in the zoo are new. Like, they evolved and came about kind of like we did. So we did not come from those chimps or those bonobos or those gorillas. Those are new species evolutionarily. The idea is that we shared some common ancestor way back when chimps and bonobos didn't even exist. Neither did humans. And that split, for whatever reason, gave rise to those two groups. Now, so that's one part. The other part is in old evolutionary videos, when they try to explain evolution, they would often incorrectly show this nice, slow, gradual evolution of one animal into another. And what we know now, at that time, say in the 70s and 80s, those videos were made based on what we currently commonly thought. But now we believe, from studying the fossils more carefully and looking at various things like development and the fossil record, that those things didn't evolve all evenly like that. They came at different times. So first, for example, comes bipedalism. In the fossil record, it suggests, and I'll show you some of these, that humans were walking upright on 2 feet way before, for example, the brain size got much larger. So things like changes in jaw size, reduction in size, differences in the sexes. So male and female humans, for example, now are around 10% different in size. But what we see in the fossil record, that was a much bigger difference, 20, 30, 40%, and probably had a different mating system because of those differences. So things like family structure and tool use, those all came later. Bipedalism comes, now tool use probably comes somewhere earlier in there. But family structure and bipedalism, for example, are on different evolutionary ranges of that. The oldest Homo sapiens fossil that we have found is 117,000 years old. So we know humans have been around at least 117,000 years, and we'll go through some of that. And I want to walk you through just some of the fossil evidence of what we have to explain human evolution. For example, I talked about the bipedalism. So 3.5 million years ago, way before Homo sapiens. So our oldest Homo sapiens fossil, 117,000 years. So you're talking 3 million years before any fossil we found. We have things like the famous Laetoli footprints in Africa that clearly show a bipedal organism walking on 2 feet. And then what goes wrong here is often there's some interpretations where people will draw pictures of what they assumed happened. And that's okay to do, but you got to always know that you get into a little bit of storytelling and guessing, and that could be wrong. So the footprints are real, but what this particular organism looked like, we have to sort of guess at, which again I think is not bad because you don't necessarily have more evidence, but you got to be careful in knowing what you're using as your evidence versus what you're sort of guessing at as you move forward. Okay, now This is an example of an Australopithecus species here. This one dates back to 3.24 million years ago. Remember, once again, I talked about that some fossils, like the evolution of the amphibians from fish-like ancestors, some of those fossils are really good because they're in the perfect location and there's a lot of them. Humans don't make the best fossils. So we don't find, and we don't expect to find, lots of human fossils because they just don't live in the right area and they're just not the right kind of organism that you would expect to live in a shallow area of water where you have sediments being deposited. So some animals just leave better or fossilized evidence than others, and humans by their nature as a species don't leave the best fossils. So we do have some, and often this is what you find. You don't find the whole skeleton, but you'll find pieces of it, and then they'll piece it together like that. This one is quite a complete one. This is Turkana, and this one dates back 1.7 million years ago. So you're talking about like another 1.5 million years from the last fossil I just showed you. And this one appears to be some evolutionary branch between Homo habilis and Homo erectus. And so we believe from the fossil evidence, and I'll get to this in a second, but a little bit about DNA, that the hominid branch is somewhere around 4 to 6 or 5 to 7 million years ago, and that Homo sapiens probably evolved around 200,000 years ago. I told you that in an earlier slide, the oldest Homo sapiens fossil, at least that I'm aware of now, that might have changed, is 117,000 years ago. The DNA evidence, if you take pieces of the DNA that you expect don't change and you compare, say, gorillas and chimpanzees to humans in those particular regions, that suggests, we call that a molecular clock. We might have mentioned that before. Anyway, a molecular clock suggests that Homo sapiens probably evolved around 200,000 years ago. So the fossil evidence that we have suggests it was 117,000 years ago. The molecular clock data suggests it's maybe 200,000 years ago, which is quite reasonable to me. That simply suggests that maybe we don't have the first Homo sapiens fossil. We haven't found it, or it doesn't exist. The oldest one's 117,000 years. So we expect somewhere in that range, maybe to find one if it exists. But we're not far off. We're within 70 or 80% of that. Okay. Now, modern day humans, there's sort of two hypotheses. And I think the one that is pretty much most agreed upon now is the out of Africa hypothesis, which is that all races of humans evolved from an ancestor in Africa and all came as some sort of branch of we had a bunch of ancestors, maybe from Homo erectus. Homo sapiens then evolved from that group and then spread to the rest of the world. That's the out of Africa hypothesis. And then there's another sort of hypothesis that sort of resurfaces every now and then, which is that many of these groups from Homo erectus evolved, and that those groups spread to different parts of the world, and then there was interbreeding among those groups that gave rise to Homo sapiens over a period of time. And that is the multi-regional hypothesis, that essentially that Homo sapiens evolved in different parts of the world, and then there was sort of gene mixing after that. Okay. Again, I think the out of Africa hypothesis, in all the years that I teach it and then I go look it up, I think this is the one that sort of most people still think most of the evidence still supports. You start to get more into an anthropology course right about at that point and away from biology, but there's some overlap there. Okay, so that is the end of mammals. We have successfully finished our survey of all the different groups of life. And now all we have to do is some comparative anatomy and physiology on nervous system and hearts and immune system and things of that sort. And then we're done. And then we've made it through the COVID-19 craziness, hopefully. Okay, hope everyone is doing well. And I will talk with you soon.